Our reading this week is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Our reading this week is, by thinking can we arrive at understanding. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. There are many places in the Gospels where we see Jesus in open conflict with the Pharisees, that is to say, with man-made as opposed to true mystical tradition. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 15, we see a good example of how they and he locked horns. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem came and asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples break our ancient tradition and eat their food without washing their hands properly first?" Jesus, after scolding them for their hypocrisy in observing lesser rules so carefully, while ignoring the much more important ones, said, "Listen and understand this thoroughly. It is not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him common or unclean. It is what comes out of a man's mouth that makes him unclean." It wasn't that Jesus counseled against such wholesome practices as washing one's hands before eating. In an age, however, when lesser rules were given too much importance relative to the truly important observances, cleansing the heart of impure desires, for example, he emphasized the supreme importance of loving God and of communing with him. The Pharisees, the Orthodox religionists of his day, in other words, had brought true religion down to a level of intellectual hair-splitting. They mistakenly considered the way to understanding to lie through a minefield of definitions, which they tried to refine to ultimate exactitude. Jesus taught, however, that the intellect alone can never lead one to truth. Without love, indeed, there is no ultimate verity. Without fixity of purpose, born of the heart's devotion, the intellect wanders endlessly. It cannot settle for long on anything. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the 2nd chapter, the intellects of those who lack fixity of spiritual purpose are inconstant, their interests endlessly ramified. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning. Seems nice to see some green. I just got back from a wonderful little mini vacation with my 2 sisters in Yellowstone. It's been my oldest sister's desire to have a chance to be in Yellowstone in the winter. So she just turned one of her big decades, so we decided we better do it now or it's going to be never. So anyway, that was our little adventure. And it was actually very wonderful. I mean, if you've ever been to Yellowstone where there's hardly any people, that's kind of what it was. It's very quiet and peaceful. And it was also in the teens and with about a 20-mile-an-hour wind, so it was below zero whenever we went out with the wind blowing and the snow just whipping around. It was quite a wonderful adventure. We saw lots of animals. So, but it's good to be back and see the green of, it's white all the way across and the plain. And when you hit just on the western side of the Cascades, it's green. And then the water, it's so beautiful to come into this area because it's just that different feeling from the snow and the cold. But it was a wonderful experience, and I'm glad to be back. And this particular topic, although the reading pertains specifically to the scriptures, I wanted to take it more into how it works with our own lives how the thinking, versus perhaps intuition affects our own lives and brings us how it does bring us or does not bring us closer to God. So kind of in that vein. It's so interesting that here in the Western world, as we all know, thinking is God, it's the guru, where the scientific mind is supreme. I know I was raised that way, and the intuitive thing was kind of woo-wee, and it just isn't kind of there. So we've come a long way since those days, but even so, the Western mind, the rational, logical self seemed to reign supreme. And it's so interesting, even in those religious leaders or spiritual leaders, you might say, in our country, they serve in an advisory capacity usually, and coming from their thinking, they just have this high regard for their thinking. And, we've learned that, that really isn't necessarily what it's all about, especially in the spiritual world. So I had this opportunity to spend some time revisiting a talk that I had listened to. I think Riemann actually sent the link to us quite a few years ago. But anyways, I revisited it. It's on the internet. It's a talk by this Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, and she wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight. And it's really a wonderful scientific way to approach this topic. So it really fits very well. But she, when she was 37 years old, she had risen to, have a PhD. She was a brain scientist, brain research scientist, graduating from Harvard, had a practice, and so very knowledgeable into the scientific realm. And at 37, she had a stroke, and the stroke was in the left side of the brain. So it took away her functions in the left side of her brain. It took 4 hours for her to lose all the capacity in the left side of the brain. And she talks in this video and in her book, too, about what it was like to slowly lose the left side of the brain functions. And it took her 8 years after that to recover those functions again. And so this was about her experience, and I just wanted to share some of that, but briefly just talking a little bit about the right and left hemispheres of our brain. As we all know, the cortex of the brain is convoluted, and there's actually 2 distinct halves to the brain. And she actually held a human brain there on the video, and you can actually see how it is cleaved in the middle. The connections are more the matter and stuff in the brain, but all we had were the 2 hemispheres there, and they're actually cleaved. They're totally separate. And the right side of the brain is that brain, as we know, most of us are kind of have some awareness of it, which is the side of the brain that tunes into the present, into the now, into the moment. It's what we call the intuitive side. It's the side where the insights come. And she took it even further and said it's also the side that perceives that direct energy of God. It perceives the reality, our true reality. It perceives the oneness of itself with all, the oneness with the divine. And then, of course, then we have the left side of the brain, which most of us are, again, aware of. And this is the thinking side of the brain. That's what we are, aren't we? We're thinking beings, but we're not really. We're learning that that's not really what it is. But that is the left brain. It's the thinking part of the brain. And it thinks about the past, and it thinks about the future, and it thinks about the problems, and it thinks about all the things that we're used to thinking that we are, and how all the ways that we used to react. And it's all that subconscious stuff that it's in tune with. It's the part of the brain that tells you you've got to remember to go to the grocery store and get the milk, and it's a part of the brain that doesn't like working with the boss because the boss doesn't recognize how good you are, and all that stuff that we go with. It's the talking side of the brain. It works with language. It's the chatterbox part of the brain. So here we have two sides of the brain, and when we're whole, like we are now, most of us, I think, the sides overlap to some extent. But most of us work seemingly more from the left side of the brain. So what happens when the left side of the brain goes away? Can you imagine what it must be like? Well, she experienced what that was like. She said at first, when she realized there was something funny happening to her, she said she noticed like her hand was, she could see it was there, but it was like it had fuzzy edges, and it was kind of like it was just kind of dissolving into energy. And she realized that it just really wasn't what she thought it was, and her whole body felt that way. She said she felt, the first thing she felt was a sense of a remarkable peace and calmness. She said it was actually a very wonderful experience. She felt still. She didn't have all this stuff going on in her head. But she also realized every now and then the left side would kick in and it would say, "You're in trouble, you're in deep trouble, you got to get help." And yet the other side of her was just she calls it la-la land. She said it was just a wonderful place. But she did manage in enough time to figure out how to dial the phone with great difficulty. She describes what that was like. And she said when she tried to talk, she said she sounded like she was a golden retriever dog woofing. And when she was listening to the person on the other end that she'd reached, that person woofed back at her. That's what she heard. So, it's kind of interesting. All this stuff that we communicate with, it's the left side of the brain. And yet this right side is what we're talking about more so when we talk about spirituality. And I want to read just a few sentences here because I didn't want to paraphrase. What she said was her experience as she really lost her left side of the brain. She said, "My thoughts were no longer a constant stream of chatter about the external world and my relationship to it. That stream of chatter, a constant part of my day, ceased entirely. With it came a growing sense of peace. I felt enfolded by a tranquil sense of euphoria. Instead of being locked into being Jill and all that defines Jill, I felt a sense of being at one with the universe, totally in the present and in the presence of divine grace." So too with us, hidden within us, each one of us, is that presence of divine grace. It's there. And it's just that we're so busy using our left side of the brain, being in this world, that we aren't able to really tune into that presence. Swami Kriyananda, who is the founder of Ananda, most of you know, and he was a direct disciple of Yogananda, and he did leave his body this last spring. As a youth, he was very intellectual, and we know he wrote lots of books. And as a youth, he did a lot of searching because he really wanted to find truth. But the only way he knew how was to use his brain. And so he did it intellectually. He would analyze something. He would debate, verbal sparring with people, trying to delve ever deeper into what it is that he was yearning for, which was to know truth, to know reality. What is it all about? And so he had this great intellect, and it was only when he started to begin to turn to the Eastern teachings, and back in those days we didn't have East-West bookshops. It was rare to find stores that had more deeper teachings. But he found one in New York City, and he found the Bhagavad Gita. He was totally blown away by the wisdom of that scripture. And then he found the autobiography of a yogi, written, of course, by Paramahansa Yogananda, the teacher that we follow here. And he said instantly he knew that man, that master, knew what it was that he was seeking. Up to that point, He said none of the teachers in college or the writers in the books particularly, he felt really knew. They were just speaking from the intellect. But he knew that Yogananda knew from within that he knew truth, and Swami Kriyananda wanted that so badly. And as most of you know, he got on the next bus and went out to Los Angeles and was accepted as a disciple of Yogananda. And it's interesting, some of the very earliest ways that Yogananda worked with Swami Kriyananda, he had told Swami to get devotion. He could see that Swami was an extremely intelligent, brilliant person, a leader just by nature. But he told him, get devotion. And this was kind of a new idea for Swami, but of course he took it very seriously, and he worked with it. He worked with it by chanting. Chanting is a wonderful way to get into your heart and to get out of your mind, which is what, of course, we're trying to do here. And he did, by chanting a lot, by really working with his heart. He learned what this was, and those of us who knew him in the later years of his life, he exuded divine love like no other person that we've ever seen or been in touch with, divine joy. He got devotion, he had it. And this is what we're talking about here, that we can't find what it is that we're looking for simply by reading about it or talking about it. You know, the intellect, thinks maybe it's perceiving it, but it can't really get to that point of knowingness. You have to take that further into the more intuitive realm. Let that right brain and silence begin to speak to you so that you really can know and understand what truth, what life is all about. I know, I remember when the Festival of Light was first introduced into the Ananda Sunday service. We do it every Sunday here, as you know, the Festival of Light. And before that, it was a different type of a service. We had readings from an excerpt from The Path, which was Swami Kriyananda's autobiography. And it was a nice service, but as Swami said, it didn't really convey. It conveyed a truth, but it didn't convey the big picture. There was just little snippets every time you'd come. And so he got this inspiration to write the Festival of Light, which would give us an overall sense of what the teachings were all about. And it is. It's about the soul's long journey through time and space, coming back to God, coming back home. And I remember listening to it, and occasionally I'd get pulled into, this little bird and flying, and the mind was taking it into this judgmental mode, and then I didn't want to be that way. I remember I wanted to just experience it, so I kept pulling my mind away from judgment, just trying to experience it. And by the end of it, I remember feeling quite joyful and quite uplifted. I couldn't really tell you what it was saying. If someone had asked me, I probably couldn't have told you anything about what it said, but I could tell you what it felt. And it felt wonderful. And afterwards, a bunch of us were asked to stay and talk with the ministers just about this Festival of Light and what we thought. And I really couldn't say much. I didn't have much to say. There was a lot of talk about it. And all I remember is that my sharing was, it felt wonderful. I loved it. This is great stuff. And, and over the years, all the times that we hear it, thousands of times I've heard this read or have read it. And, never do I get sick of it. There's always little insights, but it's more just the feeling. So listen to the festival when we read it again today, and every time you come and you hear it, try to get into the vibration of it, because it really is, it comes from that level. It doesn't come from the intellect. And so try to receive it from that higher level. I just want to give a little analogy to kind of work with how we can work more with this right brain, with trying to lift our energies. And I want you to picture an hourglass. We all know what an hourglass looks like. And on the bottom of the hourglass, picture the subconscious mind, which is more or less what we call the left brain. And the left brain is some of the things we talked about, where we get stuck in the little self and where we define ourselves as who we are. And then the upper part of the hourglass is the superconsciousness, which is, of course, where we receive that inspiration and we receive solutions, and that gives us that positive, enthusiastic energy that we really want in our lives. And then the in-between, that little narrow part in between, is the conscious mind. Now the conscious mind can be really good or it can be really bad. Depends on how you look at it, of course. But looking at it in this way, when the conscious mind is being really bad, it's not perceiving how it's reacting from the subconscious. It's when we're on automatic. And we react. Something hits us and we react. And we feel disempowered. You feel like the world is doing stuff to you. And, all that kind of that negative stuff that happens throughout the day. But when we use that conscious mind appropriately, we're tuning in and realizing that this is happening. And we're saying, no, I don't want to behave that way. And in doing so, you're choosing to lift your energy up into the superconsciousness, trying to pull that inspiration down, be solution conscious, be positive, energetic, enthusiastic, be at the highest level that you can be. It's directional. None of us probably are going to be saints tomorrow, but if we can be directional in our energy at every moment, try to live more and more in the present. And I know that's hard to even think about what that means, but just trying to be more aware so that you can take control of that direction of your energy, lifting it upward. Coming here, you of course know some of the things that we teach about how to do this. Of course, meditation in particular we teach is a wonderful technique in helping us to lift our energy. Chanting, we just mentioned again, is another one. Sometimes we're at work and we're driving our car, someone cuts us off, whatever it is, it's in the moment type stuff. Change your energy. In that moment, if that conscious mind can be aware, just be aware to change your energy. Put on a different piece of music that's uplifting rather than the news, or take a walk in nature, or just simply walk in place and just get that energy moving again. Whatever it is, just change your energy. And again, it keeps us in the present and helps us to move forward. Yogananda has a 1-minute prayer that I became acquainted with again, and it's just so simple, but again, another thing to be conscious of. A 1-minute prayer to help you to stay in the higher sense of consciousness. And if you have a situation, or maybe a person, something in your life that you'd like to change because it's drawing you downward rather than upward, then Yogananda said, simply focus on that person or that situation and just surround it with light for 1 minute and simply send it peace and harmony. 1 minute. Peace and harmony. Peace and harmony. 1 minute. Okay, so do that for a minute. Now just close your eyes. And just bring to mind a person, a situation. Perhaps it's something that you've been struggling with. Maybe it's something small or something big. And just visualize it surrounded in God's light, just that white light. And just send it peace and harmony. Peace and harmony. Peace and harmony. Peace and harmony. And we do that for a minute. And then we won't quite finish it today, but then the next thing is for only 15 seconds when you're done. 15 seconds, you do it to yourself. You visualize yourself surrounded in light, God's light, and send yourself peace and harmony for 15 seconds. And Yogananda said that if you did that 5 times a day, he didn't tell me how many days it would take, but I said 5 times a day. He guarantees it works. Something so simple. But we just have to be conscious to remember to use these techniques that we've been given. I remember, God is behind our rational minds. And I remember about 1.5 to 2 years ago, I was at Living Wisdom School there at the Aldercrest Elementary School of Shoreline School District, where we had our location for our school. And we were in the midst of wanting to find another location for the school because we couldn't grow where we were. Another organization had come and leased out all the rooms in this elementary where we were, and we were getting a lot of enrollment, and we had already enrolled more children than we really could use, or we could fit in the space that we had. And so we did a lot of looking around and a lot of due diligence, and realized that it's really hard to find a space for a school. There's so many rules and regulations. And any commercial space is extremely expensive, and we needed a lot of space. So it was a tough row. I was feeling a little panicky, but luckily Padma was working with me. And I got great inspiration from her, because during that time, she just had that fixity of purpose that they were talking about here in the Bhagavad Gita, a steadiness of intent, that, we needed the room, we were doing God's work, and so the room, the new space would be there for us. It had to be there for us. It's God's will. And that fixity of purpose, that faith that God would provide was very strong coming from Padma. And I remember just drawing that in so that I could stay firm in the same way. And sure enough, it was interesting when we talked to the deputy superintendent, who was the person at the school district that we interacted with, and we were asking, is there anything else in the district, because we hadn't found anything truthfully outside the district. We were just praying that there'd be something, and she looked at all the space. There's a lot of spaces that school district has downsized a lot, so they have a lot of other buildings that they're renting. But there was no openings, nothing that would be big enough for what we needed. They had a room here, a room there, but nothing that would work for us. And then I remember there was this, she kind of stopped, and there was this kind of this switch in energy, and she kind of thought like, well, maybe we've got this elementary that has been closed for 5 years. We're not using it. Maybe, we could fix it up, and maybe if you liked it, this might work. So it was just that switch. I remember just feeling it. It's like, yes, this is it. And so, we went to look at it, and, the rest is history. It didn't need a lot of fixing up, but it worked for us. It was a wonderful location. But it's just that you're keeping your rational mind, you do what you need to do, but always hold it in a higher light. Always use that divine energy and power which is there, coming from that right brain, if we only listen to it and put it forth, it works. It's there for us at all times. So I just want to leave that with you now, to just, we talk more from the scientific point, but just to tune into that higher self, as much as you can, deepening your meditation, tuning into it. For God is there. We need to learn how to relax into those more intuitive sides of us, kind of going with a flow in our life. I know at the farm where I am living now, it's that's what it is, going with the flow. And it feels like, in particular, that's what needs to happen, because going with the flow and really being in tune, you're shown what's needed as we take the steps along the way. And we have the faith and fixity of purpose that that's going to work. It's unfolding. And so our life unfolds if we allow it to do so. Our life unfolds. God is right there. He's, just as Jill Taylor here mentioned, we just have to open up to allow that aspect to be there for us more and more. So tune in, and God wants to help us. We just have to learn how to let Him. Thank you.